Hi everyone, this is Anson from AnsonAlex.com and welcome to part 2 of my 2013 video series on Google Apps for Business, Education, and Government. Part 1 served as an overview of the Google Apps Admin Console interface, and here in part 2 we're going to talk specifically about adding, deleting, suspending, and just overall managing users here in Google Apps. So I hope the video helps and enjoy. As I mentioned in this video, we're going to be talking about user management here in Google Apps. So to start out, I'm here in my Google Apps Admin Console and I'm at the dashboard screen. To access the user management section, I'm just going to navigate to the left side of my screen and I'm going to click on Users. If you've used the old version of Google Apps for Business, you'll notice that this screen looks somewhat different than the old screen. So as you can see, right in the middle of my screen, I have all of my current active users listed. And right now I only have 2 users. I have myself, Anson Alexander, and then I have good old Bruce Wayne, who hasn't logged in yet, as we can see right here. So you can see we've got some information right in the middle of our screen regarding these users, including the last time they signed in, and then their email usage over here to the right. If I wanted to add a new user to my organization, I could just go up to the top right side of my screen and click on the Add More Users button, which looks like a silhouette and a plus symbol. And when I click on that, I have the option of adding a user who already has an email account. It has to be a Google account, but I could invite a user. This is actually a new feature of Google Apps. They don't have to have the same domain email address, so it doesn't have to be an AnsonAlex.com email address anymore. I could add the user manually, which is going to be creating a whole new user with an AnsonAlex.com email address. That's probably going to be the most common form you're going to use. And then if you're an already established organization and you have a list of all the users that you need to set up, you didn't migrate them from another account, you could add several users at once using a CSV file. If you're interested in how to do that, you can just quickly Google add Google Apps users with a CSV file, and Google will have instructions on how you can do that. But for this video, I'm actually going to add a user manually, because like I said, that's probably the most common form that you're going to use. So I'm just going to click continue, and you'll notice that I then have the options to enter a first name for my user, a last name, and then the email address that I would like that user to have. At the same time, I can have a password automatically set by clicking on the Use a Temporary Password button, or I could create a specific password for this user. You'll also notice that at the bottom I have the option to require a new password to be set by the user when they first log in. So when I create new users in an organization, I generally have a default password I use. It could be something really simple, and I always hit this checkbox so that when they first log in, they are prompted to create their own password. And as the administrator, I don't know it. It's just good for security reasons. So it's definitely a good idea to do that. So I'm actually going to do that right now. I'm just going to enter a simple password, and I'm going to create a new user. You'll notice that it says the user John Doe has been created, and he's now listed in my list of users down here. So let's say we have a user, John Doe. He no longer works for the organization, and I want to suspend this user. If I click the checkbox next to this user's name, you'll notice that I get some more options over here on the left side, top left side of my screen. I can add this user to a group, which we're going to talk about groups in depth in a later video in this series. I could delete this user. Now you have to be careful when deleting a user, because if you fully delete them, all of the documents and calendar events and everything associated with that user will also be deleted. So generally speaking, when a user first leaves your organization, you will want to suspend that user, which I'll show you how to do here in a minute. And then the other option is to move to another organization. So if I have multiple organizations here in my Google Apps installation, I could go ahead and I could click this button and I could select another organization from the list. The real main purpose of doing that would be if you have different areas within your organization that you want to have access to different apps. So maybe you don't want your sales department to be using Google Drive, but you do want your accounting department. You could actually create 2 organizations. One would be sales, one would be accounting. You could give your accounting department access to the Google Drive feature while restricting access to that feature for your sales team. So you can really define a hierarchy of permissions here by using organizations in Google Apps. Okay, Now at the same time, if I click right on John Doe's name, it's going to take me to his entire profile. So I can see everything about him. I can see whether he's an active user or not. This is where I could suspend the user. I could suspend John Doe, which means he won't receive any new emails or calendar invitations, but all of the documents or calendar events that John Doe owns will still be available in my organization. So if you're using Google Drive and people are creating their own documents, you definitely want to make sure that if those are shared documents, that you have access to them even after that user leaves the organization. And suspending that user is the way to do that. Now, I also want to mention that when you do suspend a user, it is still using a seat here in Google Apps. So if you've got 10 seats available, if you suspend somebody, they're still going to be part of that 10 users. Until you delete them, they're going to take up a seat in your organization. So just be aware of that as you move forward. So I can look down here, I can see which Google apps are enabled for John Doe. I could reset his password, change any of his settings. If I click on this profile section, you'll see how it opens up over here to the right. So again, I could reset his password in here. I can take a look at how much storage he's using in both email and Drive. I could add nicknames. Now, what nicknames are, it's basically a way to create another email address for somebody, but have those emails sent to their main address. So let's say John Doe is my human resources person, and I want him to be the first contact for human resources in my organization. Now, he obviously has the email address john.doe@ansonalex.com, but for general HR inquiries, I want the public to send emails to hr@ansonalex.com. So what I could do is I could go in here and I could add a nickname for John Doe, and I could just call it hr@ansonalex.com, and then save those changes. So if an email now goes to hr@ansonalex.com, as we can see down here in the nickname section, that email will be sent to John Doe. So that's a great way to have people who need multiple email addresses but want all of their emails in one specific place. So if we scroll down here, the email routing, if you don't know what that is, I wouldn't worry about that. That's for advanced email setups. If you are setting up the normal Google Apps for enterprise, for business domain here, you should be fine and you won't have to worry about that. Okay, so those are the profile settings that we have. Again, we're going to look at groups later on in this video series. If we click Show More here at the bottom, we get some more options for this user. We can look at the security that's set up for this user. So we could add an extra layer of security if we wanted to. It's another one of those things where if you are aware of two-step verification, you're probably going to want to access this area, but if you're not aware of it, I wouldn't worry about it at this time right now. You might want to Google it and hear more about it. It just makes your organization's accounts a little bit more secure, a little bit harder for other people to access. If we were assigning devices to John Doe, we could go ahead and take a look at that. Again, that would be Android devices. And then we can look at the bottom, we can see how many Google services are enabled outside of the core services of Mail, Calendar, and Drive for John Doe, and then how many marketplace apps are enabled. So the Google services would be like YouTube, Google+, Picasa, any of the applications, web-based applications that Google owns. The marketplace apps we're going to look at later on in this video series, but that would actually be third-party applications that have been created using the Google Apps API, and they hook into your Google accounts. So I mentioned in the first video in this series, we can have CRM systems, help desk systems, all of that sort of thing linking directly to our Google accounts. If we had some of those enabled, they would be listed here in the marketplace apps enabled. The last thing I want to show you while we're looking at John Doe's profile is up here at the top right. We can see we have some quick links. We can quickly reset his password, add him to a group. We could rename the user, so if we don't want him to be called John Doe anymore, we could move him to another organization. Again, there's another way to do that. We looked at that same feature earlier on in this video. Google always tries to find multiple ways of doing things to make it as easy as possible for the users. And then, of course, we could delete John Doe. At any point while you're in the Google Apps admin console, if you're looking for some help, you do have Google Search, obviously, but you can also go to the Help link up here at the top right, which will take you to the Help Center for Google Apps and the forums. Okay, so this is how we can enter all of that information about specific users here in Google Apps. I do want to go back to the main users panel though, and to do that, I could probably just hit back a couple times, but notice that up on the top left of my screen, I have this little navigation area, and if I click on the users section, all of those 6 main areas that we talked about in the last video are available, as well as going all the way back to my dashboard. So I'm just going to click on users to take me back to the users dashboard. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to show you here is if you haven't gone through the Google Apps setup wizard, which I mentioned in the first video in this series, you probably haven't specified all of the settings for your users in general yet. So when you're at the users dashboard, which we're at right now here in Google Apps, if you go to the very top right and you click on the gear icon where it says settings, you can go to setup. And that will actually take you to the wizard where you can go to the users and groups section. It takes you there automatically, and you can set up the default settings for all of the users in your organization. So if I just walk through this real quick, you'll see, do I have any other users? You might. At this point, I'm just going to say no. It's going to ask me which services I would like my users to have access to by default. So you can see by default, Gmail, Calendar, and Drive are all turned on. Google Sites is not. So if you want your members of your organization to create websites here in Google, you'll have to go ahead and enable the Sites feature. That's up to you. Once you're ready, you can go ahead and hit Next. You'll see that it just gives you some information of what you can actually do with Gmail. You can do your video messaging, you can access Gmail from mobile devices, and you can obviously search your inbox using a Google-powered search engine. So we'll just go to the next step here. And it's telling me that in this section, we're going to go ahead and set up Gmail for our organization. It's asking me if I want to add or change any options. I could click on this link over here to the right to specify some advanced options. I could migrate from an old email account. I could bring in contacts from an old email account. If maybe I want to use the Google Mail service, but I want to use it through Outlook or Apple Mail, something like that, I could hit this checkbox. So you do have some advanced settings here. I'm just going to go back from here now. We're going to go to the next step. Next step again. It's going to ask me if I want to use Google servers or another server. If you don't really understand the difference, then you're definitely going to want to use Google servers. This would be for more advanced users who have maybe their own mail server that they want to use, but they still want to use Google Apps for Business. So if you don't know, just go ahead and choose Google servers and hit Next. It's going to ask us to direct our MX records to Google's mail servers. And this is probably the most advanced part of setting up Google Apps for Enterprise. So you actually need to access your domain's cPanel. So for this example, it would be ansonalex.com. And I need to change the MX records. And if you haven't done this before, Google does try and walk you through. So down here at the bottom, you can choose who your domain host is, and then you can go ahead and hit Next, and it will walk you through the process of changing your MX records. Really, Google is also your best friend for doing this. Just do a Google search on changing MX records with your host. If you have like GoDaddy or HostGator, one of those hosts, they should have their own instructions, their documentation on how to change MX records. Just be really careful when doing it, because if you already have email set up for your organization, if you mess something up when you're changing those MX records, all of a sudden, all of your email might go down until you get it fixed. So definitely be careful when doing that. I'm just going to click Do This Later for now. And it's just telling me what the link is to access Gmail for my organization. So I can go to mail.google.com/a/ansonalex.com. I'm going to go ahead and hit Next, and then it's going to take me into the Google Calendar setup and all of that. So we kind of went a little bit farther than the users and groups, but I did want to show you that when you first access that users and groups section to set up all the default settings, you can go up here to the gear and hit the setup, and it will take you to that wizard, which I mentioned in the last video. So that is how you can manage all of your users here within Google Apps for Enterprise. Just going back to the dashboard, I want to mention that in the next video in this series, we're going to talk about the company profile section here in Google Apps for Business. So I hope this video helped. If it did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up here on YouTube. And if you want to see more technology tips and tutorials, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's all I have for you today. This is Anson from ansonalex.com.